All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May meeting of the Sorrel Citizens Oversight Committee. It's just a fun word to say in the morning, Sorrel. Anyways, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Our first item on the agenda is a roll call. Jackie?
Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. We'll do the pledge first. I know. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now we'll do the roll call.
Okay.
Jackie?
Good morning. Lorraine Koss is not here. Charles Venuto.
Here.
Vinnie Toronto.
Here.
Don Dice is not here. John Windsor.
Here.
Terry Casto.
Here.
Bobby Putnam is not here yet. Laura Lee Thompson. Here. Stephanie Ely is not here. Kimberly Newton is not here. Todd Swingle.
Here.
Kurt Smith is not here. Barbara Wall-Scanlon. Here. And Eric Manis.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
All right, thank you. All right, the first thing is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on the agenda? Public comment? All right, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Thank you. The next thing is the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any public comment? Okay, we'll take a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, unanimous. Great. We'll go ahead and go to progress and fiscal reports. Our monthly progress report. Virginia and/or Terri.
Yeah.
Good morning.
I'm just
doing the screen.
Yes, she's helping with the technical stuff. So, as you know, this is a quarterly reporting month, so I will only touch on a couple things from the progress report that won't be covered in the quarterly report. So, we removed 5 more derelict vessels this month. And then over on the presentations, it's been another busy month. Lots of requests for presentations. So thanks to committee members and staff who are out there informing the public and taking input and communicating. I wanted to take a few moments. Last month, the committee asked for the latest on the seagrass recovery. And so I have 3 slides from the Water Management District. Thank you, Terri. So the maps on the left show where the seagrass was either light green is patchy, dark green is contiguous. Up, and you see mostly up in Mosquito Lagoon, and then in 2023, that green area expands up in Mosquito Lagoon, and there are also a couple little patches in the North IRL, north of Titusville, on both the east and west shores, and you see there's some other patches down here in the south end of the county, just north of Sebastian, well, north and south of Sebastian Inlet. And then the graph, the green bars are the area of seagrass, whereas the black line is the length of the transects. So when they're swimming out from the shore on the transects that they do year after year after year, they map how long are those transects. And so you see an uptick in 2023 in both the length of the transects with seagrass and the aerial extent of seagrass. And these are draft findings. They plan to finalize them within the next month and present them to the St. Johns River Water Management District Governing Board on June 11th. So things could change a little bit, but you asked for the data, so this is the current status. So this shows by sub-lagoon sort of the same comparison. What was the extent of the seagrass in 2021 versus the next big mapping event in 2023? And so you can see on the, let me see if I can move, oops. move this out of the way for the moment. So you can see the 2,000 hectare increase of the extent of seagrass in Mosquito Lagoon. We also have small increases, but at least they're increases, in the northern Indian River Lagoon, the Banana River, and the central Indian River Lagoon, whereas down in the south central and southern lagoon outside of Brevard County, they are still seeing losses. And then this is another view of the same information. So by subbasin, you can see, historically how much seagrass was in the North IRL, and then the decline in 2016 with very low numbers ever since. And so you see, very low seagrass cover in the north and central and Banana, with a significant recovery in Mosquito Lagoon. And let me try moving this somewhere. And that's the last slide, so.
Okay, great. Does anyone have any questions? Laura Lee, please.
Yeah, it's more of a comment than a question, but the increase in the length of the transects, it's telling us that the water quality is getting better, because I guess that means that seagrass is growing out in deeper water again now. rather
Right,
than-
that the water, improvement in water clarity is
Clarity, yeah,
allowing
not clarity, not
seagrass
quality.
to extend out to deeper
Yeah.
depths.
All right. Any other
Okay.
questions on that? Virginia, thank you for getting that data
All right.
for us.
Yes. Yeah, next up is Lord.
Okay, so, all right, so that's the end of the monthly progress report. So the next one is the monthly revenue graph and financial statements from Lori.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Lori.
I'm happy to fill in for Molly today. All right, so we have received $4.4 million for February collections, and the total for revenue from concession is $383 million. For the monthly financial statement of the anticipated $415 million in revenue, by the end of the fiscal year, the actuals received so far are $334 million. For the expenditures this fiscal year, the total assigned to the project and programs is $56 million, and the actual spent is $10.6 million. And for the second quarter, the financial tables, we will scroll through them. And once we get down here to the core, the grant financial tables. And do we have any questions on anything?
Does anybody have any questions on the revenue graph or financial statements? All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
You're welcome.
Okay, next up is the quarterly project update from Terri.
Good morning.
Good morning, Terri.
Here's my presentation. So this is the quarterly progress report for reporting period January 1st through March 31st. This also reflects the plan updates. So I wanted to make a comment on the financial table. The project cost column, the Sorrel project cost column, is the inflated amount based off the rainbow table in the plan update, and then the contracted amount is what we have contracted for each of those project types. And so also on the performance table, that cost share column for the contracted is the Sorrel inflated amount. Just so, I wanted all the numbers to match, and as we amend the contracts for inflation, that contract amount will change over the next few years. So,
And then that also, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, that uses the inflation numbers that you all have already put in.
Correct.
Okay, great.
I also wanted to mention that we kind of changed things up. Before, we had the financial table exactly matched the performance table, so you could scroll page per page. But we have differentiated between annual removals and one-time removal projects. So we're going to talk about that as we go through the presentation. But I just wanted to put that out there so that they don't line up exactly anymore, unfortunately. So.
Great.
So first, we have our public education campaigns. This quarter, we reprinted the fertilizer bookmarks. Jackie has some up front. If we already gave these out, but if you want another one, they're up there. And I also wanted to mention that the fertilizer ban starts June 1st through September 30th, so put that plug in there. We also continued with the septic maintenance campaign and the irrigation education and stormwater BMP education. We started the surveys for that, and they're in the final review stages right now. There's our lovely Don Dice right there. He helped with some of the Restore Our Shores programs this past quarter, and they are 40% complete with their projects. We have our wastewater facility treatment upgrades for reclaimed water. The Rockledge facility is almost 80% complete now. They'll be done by the end of the year. We have the 3 completed projects in Cocoa Beach, Palm Bay, and Titusville. And then the Melbourne project, let me look at my notes on this one. The design's undergoing value engineering with plans to rebid this summer, and West Melbourne has 90% design complete. And the South Brevard Water Reclamation Facility is in bid prep for design. We have our rapid infiltration basin and spray field upgrades. No changes here. We still have the Long Point Park upgrade that was done in 2017, and we are in the process of starting to reach out to the Sterling House condominium to see if they are interested in upgrading their spray field. For package plant connections, we have Willow Lakes underway. Their design is about 53% complete. We are still trying to secure more funding for the Cove, and Indian River Shores has not started yet. For our sewer lateral projects, we have 662 of 691 code enforcement cases resolved. The Osprey smoke testing contract was executed, and that one, they're working on the scope and contract negotiations with their awarded bidder. So again, those numbers, I like to say, will change, that percentage will change as more repairs come in. And the county is also doing additional smoke testing. Some of it's in the IRL watershed, some of it's not. So we're getting some phone calls on that as well. Our septic to sewer projects, we still have the 4 completed, and then a variety of Melbourne's projects are underway. South Beaches OP and Sykes Creek N are in the bidding phase. For MICO, we have under construction, 1 of 18 connections are complete. South Central C, we have, I think the number's even higher now, but it was 59 of 150. I think we're up to 65 now, something around there. So those are moving along nicely. And then we still have all of these in the design phase at different phases, so also moving along. For our septic upgrades and quick connects, we had an additional 62 applications for the septic upgrades, completed an additional 27. Quick connects, we had 12 more applications, and 90 were completed this past quarter. Stormwater projects, the Sandpoint Park baffle box was completed at their park there. This was very similar to the Sherwood one with the windows, so you can see what's going on inside, which is fun. And then the M1 Crane Creek is under construction. They're about 45% complete. This should be wrapping up early next year. And we had the video last month, if you recall, on that project. We also have all of these in different phases of design. The McNabb outfall bioretention actually went to construction this past month, so that one's underway. For vegetation harvesting, we have 7 projects now completed. I'm going to scroll on over to here. This was the unincorporated countywide vegetation harvesting. They removed over 8 million pounds of vegetation and over 9,000 pounds of total nitrogen with their projects. This is the chain of lakes Pond C up in Titusville. That was, you can't even tell that was water under there, looking at that, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a field.
Yeah. So for our muck removal projects, oh, one thing I did want to mention, this is one of the one-time removal projects. So that was one thing I wanted to highlight on here. As we move through the end, it'll make more sense. So our muck removal projects, we have, I broke these out into, we have 21 muck removal projects and 16 interstitial projects in the plan. Grand Canal and Sykes Creek are underway. No dredging occurred for those two projects during this reporting period. Grand Canal because of the manatee closure period, and Sykes Creek for the DMMA site restoration. The Gallie Northeast bid was opened earlier this month, and Abbey's going to touch on that a little later. We also received proposals for the Titusville Railroad East and West projects, and they are currently under review. I think the meeting is set up next month for that. Our Oyster Bar projects, this was not Oyster Bar season, January through March, but you might have noticed the zoo had a lot of gabions along the O'Galley Causeway, so they got started after that, but I think they finished that North IRL contract, so we'll be reporting on that next quarter. And then our planted shoreline projects, we have 8 of them or 11 in the plan, 8 are complete. The Titusville Causeway project bid has been awarded, and we have a groundbreaking ceremony on May 29th at 10 a.m. at the Max Brewer Causeway. So Sorrel funded the planted shoreline portion of this project, but this black line here is wave attenuating structures that are going to be installed into the water, and there's also a seagrass planting portion of this project as well. So it's multifaceted, and Sorrel's only funding a small portion of it, but it's a very interesting project.
And that's the black line through the center.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
those are going to be the wave attenuating structures that are,
Near the bottom.
yeah.
Oh, down near the bottom.
Sorry,
Okay. No worries.
can you see
There's a
this?
Couple black lines there, trying to figure.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't very descriptive.
Big black line.
Yeah.
Got it. The thick black
thick
line.
one.
Okay, great.
And lastly, we have the clam aquaculture. We've got one other farmer who's been applied and approved for the program and has planted his clams.
I've been talking to so many people going, you want to be a clam farmer?
Yeah.
I'm trying. We still got room for 4. Anybody out there?
Okay, so the vegetation harvesting, interstitial water treatment, and clams are one-time removal projects. So I broke the table out a little bit here into total annual TN reduction, total annual TP reduction, total one-time TN, total one-time TP. So it made sense. So we weren't reporting this previously, so that's why there's 2 dashes there. We updated this graphic. So we tried to do this on the thermometers, but they got too congested. So we broke it out into these bar charts here so you can kind of see where we're at in the progress. The plan has a total of 1.4 million pounds of removal. Between our annual and one-time reductions, we're at 236,000. With everything in progress, we are at nearly 900,000 pounds of total nitrogen reduction. 19,000 for our total phosphorus and 75,000 for our in progress for total phosphorus.
Great.
So-
Those thermometers, they're 8 years old. You know, it's maybe about time we retired them. I love that. That's awesome. Thank you, Terry. Great job.
Yeah.
Laura Lee, yes.
Yeah, when you say a one-time removal, that doesn't mean that you're only going to do it one time, right? You're going to come back in a year or 2 and remove vegetation again from Chain of Lake?
Well, that's part of the maintenance, so Sorrel doesn't cover maintenance, so we're doing the initial with intentions for the maintenance to continue.
Dr. Windsor and then Todd?
And you said the clam project was also a one-time removal, and I'm having some trouble figuring that one out. Would you?
Yeah.
Because the clams are going to stay. They're not
No,
going to,
they're
not going away.
harvested.
And they're pumping every year
but they're harvested, so the clam farmer gets the funding one time to plant the clams.
Okay.
They grow for however long they take, and then they're harvested, so those nutrients are
Oh,
removed from
okay.
the system.
Gotcha, thank you.
Todd?
Yeah, just back on these pieces with like the one-time removals, say in the storm ponds or whatever of that nature. If, I know this program's not doing that, but part of our expectation of funding is that becomes a maintenance piece. So I think it may still be helpful if we can even estimate that somewhere to look at the total impact. Because if you think about just our dollars too, we're doing the same thing on grants. We're leveraging this program as the starting point to then create additional funding opportunities. I see this as the same way that, that ongoing nutrient removal wouldn't have happened without the seed from this program. And so I think I can understand not including it in the actual sorrel, so that's appropriate and transparent. But maybe it's a different color that's tacked on top of the bar chart or something, because that side benefit of that continuing maintenance that was only made possible through this program, I think is really important to still reflect the overall value and contributions of the program.
Yes, Kimberly?
I completely agree with that, and I was kind of related to what I was going to ask. How did you calculate the prevented? So like, when does that fall off? Kind of piggybacking on what he said, like where does that amount stop? Like when does that stop counting towards what sorrel has contributed? Like on this chart right here, removed or prevented, I think that is a low number. And again, transparency for what Todd said, I just think prevented is a much larger number than what's charted here. It doesn't have to be necessarily in the initial numbers, but to kind of have a timeline of what is continuing to prosper because of that, I think is very relevant.
I don't know if I fully understand the question.
Just basic on this chart right here, removed or prevented, how did you calculate prevented? Because I think the prevented number
Yeah.
would be higher than what's included in that number, just even in the mechanical harvesting. So I'm just curious how that is calculated.
So all of our projects are calculated based off of the DEP methods for nutrient reduction. So that's where those numbers come from in the plan. And so some projects, once they're installed, like for example, the septic to sewer, that is an annual reduction because that load is no longer going into the lagoon.
So with like the mechanical harvesting, I mean, again, that's what I love. I think that the numbers are very underestimated for what's actually being prevented long-term and immediately. So just kind of what Todd said, just if there's a number where that seed, where that initial project funding was of assistance, to see that, there's a correlation to continued reduction, even if we're not actively funding those continuing projects.
You want to take credit for that, even though it's not our funding?
No, not take credit. I just think that if we wouldn't have properly, allotted those monies for the initial projects, like what Todd was saying, where does that continue to grow? So, and with grants, there are certain criteria that you have to meet in order to have that grant active or definitely to reapply in the future. So just to see how projects are going. I don't necessarily think it's responsibility of staff to continue, but no, I don't want to take credit for that, but I think it's important for public education so that the public can see that our immediate results per dollar to dollar are not where the support of this sorrel board ends. So those projects that are help initiated through funding here, clam farmers getting started, how that begins. And then there's continued benefits that exceed what our credit may or may not be exclusively to our funding.
My opinion is it just confuses the issue. I understand the point, but we also want the public to understand that these things like one-time harvesting, there needs to be a funding line somewhere in the future to continue that maintenance, and that needs to be an awareness thing in the public. So if we claim all the credit for this, we're going to do harvesting for the next 10 years because we spent, some money on the initial harvesting, I think we just confuse it.
I think you may be correct. You could be underestimating the public's savviness on the ability to differentiate between. I'd like to be optimistic on that. However, I don't think it's to claim credit. I think it's just to build community support for initiating certain projects and having that timeline, say, this is something that we invested in to get off the ground.
Okay, Todd, and then Dr. Windsor.
Well, I actually
Oh,
have a
Terry.
question.
Yeah.
Just jumped in with a comment. So I was just on the website, so do we update the thermometers, the website thermometers quarterly?
Yes.
With the new data? Okay. And, you know, one of the issues I come across all the time is the lag. You know, people don't really appreciate the inertia in the system. You know, we've been at this now, what, 8 years? And we're, as of March, you know, we were 75 million spent out of a, you know, 500, 600 million plan. So I guess my question is, I'm fine with updating this quarterly, but what's the expectation? Forget about, you know, redo and extensions and so on. This, when this thing ends, this money is fenced, right? So we have the 500 million. We'll be spending money out in 2030. And do we have a projection, a spend plan projection of how long it's going to take to work through this 600 million, 500 million?
Partially. So with the city contracts, we ask them for a timeline. For any of the contracted projects, we ask them for a timeline. And so some of those are contracted out to, the most distant one's 2032,
yeah.
right? But there are additional projects in the later years of the plan that aren't even contracted yet,
Right.
so we don't have a timeline on those.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any value in trying to swag what that might be. Okay, thank you.
Todd, and then Dr. Windsor.
Yeah, just back to the comment on this money. I wholeheartedly agree that we shouldn't blend, you know, things and take credit or even blend those dollars with what we're truly spending for all of the reasons that were said, you know, and including that there is continued investment needed. But that being said, if we are able to segment that direct Lagoon fund and then ancillary benefits, I think you can pretty readily promote that conversation, that it's not Lagoon funding and that there are, whether it's the cities, whether it's ongoing things, that's entirely possible to continue that conversation as long as those two remain segmented, that it's very clear what Sorrel's funding and that here's where the spinoffs are. So I think we can pretty readily promote that conversation, but I agree that differentiation is necessary.
Well, staff is doing a good job, I think, of showing the leverage of Sorrel funds with grant and other sources of money that's basically leveraging the.
Yep, and so it's really that same premise, just as we get into some of the follow-on and maintenance activities. So I guess that's the primary one. And then the other piece is I certainly hope that this doesn't end. So even though we got projects that are moving forward, I definitely wholeheartedly support, and I know that's not the place of the county to be the advocate, but we certainly are, is that this needs to stay in place. You just saw data that shows that this area where we're making investments is performing better than others. You're seeing that we're capturing better influx of state and federal funds because of the local investment that's being made. You know, this truly should be held out as the benchmark for how to do work as a community, and it would just be a travesty to see it end in another year, even if the projects are continuing on. But so all of us need to be advocates for this continuing too.
And that is best management practices within grants. So when you give that seed money, when you fund a project, you're, excuse me, you're doing that with a contingency that will be successful, that there will be a return on your investment after your initial seed investment. So again, to just back up, this Sorrel isn't wasting money by giving it to clam farmers who are then turning around and not being productive with that investment. Again, best management and grants, and oftentimes when you apply for grants or when you apply for some kind of support money, they ask, what did you do with money that you've gotten before? How has that produced results that benefited the community in that investment?
Yeah.
So again, not to distort any money that's being spent in any way, as well as Todd clarified.
And I think, and then I'll let Dr. Windsor talk, I think it's kind of clear, Virginia or Terry, if you guys could take a look at that continuing, if maintenance is an expectation of a reimbursement, then I think trying to find a way to capture that, but also make sure that we're completely transparent about that. Maybe if you could play around with the graph. It's a beautiful graph, so maybe spend some more time in Graphland to see if you can find a way to do that, and then bring it here before we go live with it. But Dr. Windsor?
I wasn't going to add any more, but you added, the graph's getting pretty complicated for the purpose of it, and adding more is going to make it more complicated. I was going to suggest, if this is such an important issue to the committee, that we agenda this and bring it back at a later time. But I think staff does a great job in explaining the additional benefits of what we've done so far in the annual report. And you all have an opportunity, quite an extensive opportunity to comment on the final report. And if what's being addressed in the final, if what you're interested in is not showing up in the final report each year, the project plan update, then go ahead and make some comments. I don't think that many comments always go back in to help them, help guide them. But again, I think that this may not be the appropriate time for this kind of discussion. That was what I was trying to say early on. I was trying to get this back on track to get to our,
Agreed,
never mind.
agreed, our presentation,
That's all I had.
yes.
I did want to add in, just if we were to add ancillary into this, it would be such a small sliver. We'd have, basically just have to put a little line off to the side with what it actually represents. We wouldn't be able to fit it even in the bar, the text in the bar, and be readable. So it, like Dr. Windsor said,
We may be able
might
to
be a
come up
little,
with some talking points,
but yeah, we can.
so we'll,
Talking
yeah.
points, I don't think it necessarily needs to be in addition to the bar graph, but even in-house conversation, just so we can see what we're approving or not
Yeah.
approving is being.
Kimberly,
And that's
move-
something
move
we
your mic
have,
closer.
we have like
Point it
text
towards
that we also put in with these graphs on the website, so we can always add something like that into the text portion. It just probably would be a little like cluttered in the graph itself.
Okay, great. Yes, Bobby?
Not sort of separate, but I guess sort of connected, kind of, because you're talking outside. I saw a report on the news about the clams now having excessive growth. And I was wondering if there was any connection with this Indian River clam restoration and group and sorrel.
They aren't getting sorrel funding right
Yeah.
now, but they are their own entity doing
So
their
they
own
are just
clam work.
completely separate and doing,
Yeah, I mean, we
Okay.
know about it, and we work with similar partners because they're associated with the Whitney Lab, with Todd Osborne, who was here recently.
And we've been out with them volunteering on those projects, so.
okay, that was kind of their own thing. We'll say good job, thank you, but not ours.
All right. Okay,
I'm sure.
go ahead. Terry, Virginia, was that it?
I'm done with this.
Okay. All right, any other questions? I had one, Terry, on the spray field. You said you were going to reach out to ask somebody if they were, or another entity if they were interested. Is that project already in the plan?
Yes.
Okay. And so that'll be a yay or nay, and if it's a nay, then we recover that,
Yeah.
those funding? Okay, great. I hope it's a yay. All right, we'll move on. Thank you.
Dr. Johnson, is he going to, Dr. Johnson, are you going to share your screen, or am I pushing your presentation? Okay.
If it's okay, I'd like to share my screen, but it does say host is disabled participant screen sharing. But it would be nice to have control of the slides.
Yeah, I think Logan can do that real quick.
All right, while Logan does that, we'll say, so coming up is the Sykes Creek Biological Monitoring from Dr. Johnson, Associate Dean of the College of Science and Mathematics and Professor of Biology, Tarleton State University. Where is Tarleton State University, Dr. Johnson?
Tarleton State University is in Stephenville, Texas. It's just about 45 minutes west of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex.
Awesome.
Will that be on the test?
That will not be on the test, Terry. That was what they call in the business filler. As Logan works his way up.
Which you are really good at. by the way.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And did go to school for that, so I hope I took something away.
If enabling the screen sharing is problematic, so, you could show it for me there. I could just tell you when to advance the slides.
I think it's ready.
Yep, try now,
Give it a
Dr.
shot.
Johnson. We had some magic being worked in here.
There you go.
All right, shall I begin?
Please, go ahead. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So I'm going to report on seagrass and in-fauna monitoring at the Sykes Creek Environmental Muck Dredging Site. I'm going to review the importance of seagrasses and in-fauna, and also how they might be negatively impacted by the pollution and muck in the lagoon. I'll do that just briefly because I know you're familiar with it, and then we'll move to the data. But seagrasses are, of course, important as food sources and nursery habitats and all that. They really like clear water columns so the light can get down to the bottom. However, with our harmful algal blooms in the Indian River Lagoon, that's shaded the seagrasses, stressed them out. Many of them have died. And that, as they die and the seagrass breaks down, that contributes to the organic content on the lagoon floor. So we get this accumulation of a muck layer. And of course, there's a connection between the harmful algal blooms and the muck. The harmful algal blooms are fueling, as those blooms senesce and decay, the blooms themselves contribute to organic sediment settling down to the bottom. That also smothers seagrasses and contributes to their decay. So there's this vicious cycle where blooms contribute organics either directly or indirectly. Seagrasses contribute to that too as they break down, and other things, including in-fauna. All of that becomes muck. It's all part of the muck. And muck then fluxes nutrients into the water column, and those nutrients can fuel more blooms. So blooms can contribute to muck, and muck contributes to blooms, and we get a vicious cycle. Now about in-fauna. In-fauna are the little critters living in the mud and sand, burrowing in it, tunneling around it. It can include a lot of different sorts of creatures, including mollusks like clams and snails, and arthropod crustaceans like amphipods and crabs and shrimp, polychaete worms, and even little sea stars and things like that. They move through the sediments and they churn them up and mix them. They help keep them healthy in this process of living things, stirring the sediments and tunneling through them, and actually helping bring oxygenated water down into the sediments and oxygenating the sediments. This is called bioturbation. They help turn over the sediments, help draw that oxygenated water down. And this is connected to seagrasses too, because the seagrass root systems require oxygen, and the bioturbation contributes to that. So when you get an accumulation of the muck that is this very dense, fine-grained organic sediment that is essentially anoxic, it's hard for the root systems of the seagrasses to take hold and to do their thing. It also smothers seagrasses. In addition to them not getting light from the harmful algal bloom in the water column, the muck itself can coat the fronds and the leaves and blades, let's say, and prevent photosynthesis. And also the muck can smother the in-fauna. So muck stresses or kills in-fauna. This can contribute to more muck because the in-fauna break down and become part of that organic sediment as well. And then without the bioturbation, this creates more fine-grained anoxic conditions, and we have another vicious cycle. Today, I want to focus, when it comes to discussing the dredging, with the little bit of time we have, I'd like to focus on the dredging edge. So if you can picture here, one of the muck pits at Sykes Creek or anywhere in the lagoon, kind of deeper areas tend to accumulate the muck, right? Channels and pits. So in panel A, you see the muck pit, a little different color for the sand. Panel B is a fresh dredging profile. So when you've just dredged a muck area, at the very edge, you're going to get a fairly steep wall, a steep side. In panel C, this is a look at the dredging edge over time. So pretty quickly after the dredging is completed, the sediments are going to start to slump and fall down that slope, down into the pit. And the result is that you're going to get an accumulation of probably more muck at the bottom of the dredging pit. It's possible that up on the shoulder and the shelf adjacent to the dredging edge, that some of the muck that was there is going to slough down into the pit. And so you might get an improvement in sediments at the top, and but it's not clear whether or not, it depends on how deep they dredge, but not clear whether or not you'll get sediment improvement down at the bottom of the pit. This is the Sykes Creek dredging site. The purple shaded areas are the dredged areas that were completed in phase 1. So in the fall, the last of this was finished up. The dots represent sampling sites. First, let's talk about the seagrass sampling sites. So the yellow dots are our seagrass transects, and we do our transects in a similar way to St. John so that we can compare with them. They're 100-meter transects when possible, and these sites were selected because either there was a little bit of seagrass there, or talking to locals and talking with St. John's and folks that have been studying this a long time, that it was thought that there were seagrasses there in the past. So we picked these places adjacent to the muck. We certainly would not expect seagrasses, for instance, to start growing right in the muck pits where the dredging's happening. Likely that's going to be too deep and not the right conditions. But we picked the areas closest to the dredging project where we thought seagrasses might reappear to then monitor and follow those areas. The other dots are all for in-fauna sample. The way we sample in-fauna is we have these metal jaws that we drop through the water column, and they grab a chunk of mud and they bring it up, and then we sort through that to determine what sort of little critters like mollusks and crustaceans and worms are in that sediment. The orange dots are in-fauna stations that are right in the middle of mucky areas that have been dredged out. But I want to call your attention to the light blue dots, because those are on the edges of the dredging. I call them edge transects. So they're a short little transect. If we flip back to this and panel C, that yellow line is a transect across the dredging edge. So we actually sample down at the bottom, just inside of the dredging perimeter. And then we also sample on the slope, or what we estimate to be the slope, and then at the top, just outside the dredging perimeter, because we feel that this is a dynamic area where we might see some really interesting things and learn the most about what's happening with the in-fauna with regard to dredging response. The data I'm going to share with you today are mostly winter data, meaning that they were collected in February. And the reason I'm focusing on that is because it's the first quarter or season that we have where we have some data to compare to years past. We've been doing this for about 3 years now. Some data that was collected after this phase 1 dredging was complete. So the first data I want to share are seagrass data from one of those seagrass transects in the Sykes Creek area. This is visual percent cover. So the percent cover here, the max is up to around 12%. So this is not very dense coverage. Most of it's absent or sparse. It covers 4 years, 2021 up through 2024. All of these data are from the winter season. So that means that the seagrasses, we wouldn't expect the seagrasses to be especially dense in the winter, right? They surge in the summer and they die back in the winter. That's a natural part of the process. But if you look, the transects on the x-axis here, the distance from shore out to 100 meters. The lighter greens are longer ago, 2021, 2022, 2023, and the darker green is 2024. So we look for this really light green, 2021, you'll see there really isn't any. So these transects didn't have any seagrass in 2021. In 2022, there was just a hint of some sparse seagrass, like 1% visual coverage. at a couple of locations, but most of the transect had none. 2023, a little bit more, but still sparse. 2024, we now have some seagrass at just about every sampling site along this transect, and the percent coverage is much higher than it's been in the last 4 years. Now, how does this relate to the dredging? You've had a report that there's been some recovery and some improvement of seagrasses throughout the northern Indian River Lagoon this last year, and this is part of that. And we wouldn't necessarily attribute this to be a result of the dredging. In fact, the water quality issues are something that circulates around the lagoon as more of a regional effect. However, what we can tell from this is that the dredging being so nearby has not negatively impacted the recovery of these seagrasses. At least they're still coming on, even though they are right adjacent to an environmental muck dredging project. The rest of the data we'll discuss are in fauna data. And again, these are winter. I'm using a snowflake to represent winter, even though in Florida we don't get much of that, but it's a nice visual. So these are winter data, and this is across the dredging transect. So this yellow line is to remind me and you that this down here are these are the bottom grabs where we looked at in-fauna down in the muck pit within the dredge perimeter. And up here, these are up on the top outside of the dredging perimeter. For simplicity here, I'm excluding the slope because that's complicated. But again, these are all winter data. So let's start with the inside the dredging perimeter, down in the muck pit. So in winter of this would have been just the beginning of 2022, actually. This was muck, hadn't been dredged yet. Likewise with the next year, 2023, not dredged yet. So it was basically muck that we were sampling that had not been dredged, and what we're graphing here is species richness. So species richness is just basically a count of the number of species you have. So it's an indication of diversity of the life there. So very low diversity in the muck before any dredging. 2024, dredging is complete and still very low diversity. During that same period, just outside of the dredge perimeter, we had some diversity, right? So approaching 15 species found in the in-fauna. Some appearance of a decrease over the last 2 years, and even in this most recent sampling after the dredging, we had even less than what was there 3 samplings ago in the winter. Now, the couple things to keep in mind here. This is winter, and we're focusing on winter because it's the only season we have so far where we have a season sample that is after the completion of dredging. So winter is not the time of year where we get the most diversity and the most numbers of benthic life in the lagoon. That tends to be every other season, especially summer. If things in the summer haven't gone too hot and anoxic, then it tends to be a good thriving period. So just to give you an idea of what we were seeing during the dredging, this graph is of fall data, but I want to emphasize that in the fall of 2023, this is again species richness, right? An indication of diversity. In fall of 2023, the dredging had not been completed yet. That's why we haven't been focusing on fall or spring or summer. But what we did see, comparing the fall 2023 data to the past 2 years before that in the fall, is a significant increase in the number of in-fauna, but the dredging was still underway. So looking forward for species richness, what I'm excited to see is what happens in the spring and the summer and the fall, where we get larger numbers, some species returning that are seasonal, and what all that looks like. We really don't know yet, but this is an exciting hint. Now, similar sorts of data, these look just the same as what we looked at, but this time it's not species richness, it's in fauna abundance. This is just sheer numbers. So if you combine all the worms and clams and snails and amphipods and crabs and everything else you find in there, and we total them all up, this is the overall abundance per square meter. And the numbers that we're talking about, if you look up here, we're at the y-axis, it's we're talking hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands per square meter. So it's big numbers. In fauna are small, and when they're present, there's a lot of them. Again, this is winter, because this is the quarter that we have that has a quarter to compare that is post-dredging. And down here is within the dredge perimeter. Let's start there. So again, this was for 2 years in muck that was undredged, very little, if anything. It is interesting that in the most recent sampling after the dredging down in the muck pit, that there is a little hint of some numbers. There's some life there. And this is, even though these bars are very low, we're talking thousands of individuals per square meter that weren't there before. So could be that there's been some improvement at the bottom of the muck pit, at least temporarily. Going up the slope to the dredge, past the dredge perimeter. The 2 years prior to dredging, we had tens of thousands, upwards to 100,000 individuals per square meter. That dropped in 2023. Sorry, this would actually be in the winter. Let's see, this is winter. So this is the winter of 2023. So this is probably February 2023. There's a drop in the overall abundances, but then now in February of 2024, a resurgence, a little hint of something coming back, but not yet back to what it was 2 years ago. Again, to look at the caution being that in winter, numbers are low, and we're just barely post-dredging, right? So if we look at fall data, the in-fauna abundances per square meter, really low. Well, this is outside the dredge perimeter, so this is at the top. So numbers are really low, or relatively low, for in-fauna abundances in 2021 and 2022 fall. But in the fall of 2023, when the dredging was still wrapping up, we had quite a few more. So, in summary, the seagrasses, there's a recovery going on, albeit modest, in the northern Indian River Lagoon, and that is reflected in the Sykes Creek area. I'm really pleased to see that we're seeing that recovery or that resurgence not being negatively impacted by the Sykes Creek Environmental Muck Dredging Project. When it comes to in-fauna, I would say that the post-project colonization time for in-fauna is not yet sufficient to really see what that's accomplished, right? And the only thing we have for comparison are the winter data, which is when the numbers are the least and the diversity is the least. So I'm really looking forward to what we're going to find out in the next sampling and throughout this year to see, when we get to the real growth seasons, the real diverse seasons, what has come back and what those numbers are, and how do they compare to the same seasons before the sampling. So that is the full formal presentation today. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Yes, Terry, and then Charles.
Yeah, thank you for a really interesting presentation. So your graph with the sand and the muck, it reminds me of Mohs procedure for skin cancer. So why can't the dredging operation clean the side of the pit and over the top of the pit more completely than this picture would indicate?
I like that analogy of skin cancer operations. So why didn't the doctor get the whole thing the first time instead of calling you back in for a full excision? So the dredging regulations are really set for navigation, and I don't really think, and I would invite the county folks to chime in on this if they know better than this, but last I heard, the dredging was actually not allowed to drill down all the way to the sand, and that was because of old regulations. Have they figured out a way to work around that? I should ask.
Dr. Johnson, you're exactly right. So there are strict limitations on over dredging, and the cutter head, is 18 or 24 inches across, and so it can't cut into the sand, and so it's slurping sort of out of the middle, trying to suck all of the muck but not any of the sand, and so you usually end up with a little bit of muck left behind on the bottom and around the edges.
Since the beginning of the whole concept of environmental muck dredging and the Indian River Lagoon, we talked about, boy, it'd be nice to get all of that muck out of there, but there are regulations about how the dredging happens that prevent that. But even if you did get most of this muck out, you're still going to have a reaccumulation of muck afterwards, and we want to follow the evolution of what happens in that pit.
Okay. Thank you. Charles?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. First of all, I would imagine you've kept graduate students really busy counting the infauna and good cheap labor. But I was curious with.
Thanks for recognizing that, because this is a very labor intensive. This is not something you can automate. So, yeah, every one of these mud samples and muck samples have to come back to the lab and be sorted under a microscope, and it takes hours per sample.
Within the infauna, is there a hierarchy of an indicator of health? Are certain species, a good indicator that the area is much healthier compared to other species?
Yes, there is some of that. We call those indicator species, and really mostly what we talk about would be those species that are tolerant of more organic, less oxygenated conditions. And those species that are the most tolerant are going to be those that, as an environment degrades and it gets worse and worse, they're going to be the ones that stick it out the longest. And then as improvements happen, they're going to be the ones that come back first. And so what comes to mind is there's one polychaete, Capitella capitata, who seems to be fairly tolerant of muck conditions. And so when we look at those abundance numbers, sometimes those abundance numbers are mostly one species that is very tolerant of the muck.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Windsor, then Laura Lee.
Dean Johnson, nice to see you this morning. Based on your experiences at Florida Tech over the years, would you think that a routine infaunal monitoring program should be set up for the whole Indian River Lagoon and also Brevard County? I mean, within Brevard County, we should have routine infaunal monitoring there.
Because, a lot of focus goes on seagrasses, but because infauna are such a key kind of hub for the ecosystem, I would say yes. That the infauna, first of all, they aerate and bioturbate and contribute to seagrass health, but they're also a source of food for our fisheries. Most of the fish in the lagoon, at some point in their lifetime, are foraging near the bottom on these little critters. And so it's the infauna are one of these groups that are they're way more important than most people realize. So, and they are one of the few things, unlike fish, for instance, or manatees, the infauna live in the sediment that becomes mucky, right? So they are the most, boots on the ground, direct contact with the problem at hand. So for that reason, I think they are critical to be monitored for what is happening in the lagoon ecologically.
Thank you.
All right, Laura Lee, and then Eric.
So I know that over on the west coast with some of the springs subaquatic vegetation restoration, they're using divers with like vacuum tubes that are down on the bottom, and they're getting that extra layer that's left over after the dredging. Why can't we do that here and try to get it back to bare sand? Because I think bare sand is what we really want.
So that might be a question for the county who's interacting with the dredging firms. But I would just say that you know, having a diver with a vacuum hose, that provides you a level of kind of surgical precision, right? The problem with the dredge head is that it's kind of it's a brute force technique. And so using it to slurp off 2 inches of muck from off the sand, that's a tricky prospect. So that's what you would need, is some sort of more surgical approach with a small hose and a diver who can see what they're doing and that sort of thing.
Laura Lee, was that you volunteering? just checking. No, and actually I had a comment about the rest of the dredge. So after this presentation, I just had a comment about that too. But we'll finish up with Dr. Johnson, and then if we have county questions about the dredge, we can do that. Eric.
I just had a quick question, I guess, about, and maybe it's a silly one, I don't know. Is there some sort of through line as far as which species were disappearing? Are they literally just the ones that would get sucked up in the dredge, or is there some reason certain ones disappear and other ones did not?
I think that's a good question. I do not think that disappearance is due to being slurped away. Certainly some of that happens, but the dredge is slurping up muck sediments. And you remember from the graph, you know, when muck was there, the diversity and the numbers were close to zero. And the more truly pure muck it is, the more that goes to zero. I mean, the really mucky black mayonnaise type sediments that are out there, they have nothing in them as far as fauna. So you know, what is present and what persists, I think, is really a function, and they have the ability within months to colonize from neighboring areas. So I think that what is present is really a reflection of their tolerances. So the more tolerant species, like I mentioned the Capitella capitata, there's a clam, Mulinia, that is surprisingly tolerant of anoxic organic sediments. And so those will be the ones that are there. They're able to colonize either from the water column or from migrating in from neighboring areas after the dredging's happened. If dredging improves the sediment conditions to the point where they can live there where they couldn't before, they can migrate in. If there were a few of them there and the sediment and the dredge slurped some of them out, which that probably does happen, they colonize again pretty quickly. But it's going to be the species that are tolerant of whatever the new sediment conditions are. And if they're not perfect yet, then you're going to have some species and not others.
All right, great. Any other questions for Dr. Johnson? Oh, Eric, yeah, go ahead.
I know we had Dr. Fox come in and talk about some of the sand concerns and the basically muck permeating into the sand and becoming a more permanent issue. Are any of these species that you're keeping track of, are they potential candidates to maybe help with that problem to some degree?
So I haven't considered that question before, but certainly some of these species are heavy bioturbators, right? They're really very active, and they tunnel deep, and they're active all the time. So they're churning and mixing those sediments. I would think that would be helpful to helping get rid of that interstitial component.
Okay, great. All right, well, Dr. Johnson, great use of a snowflake here in Florida. So thank you very much for that graphic. And thank you for your presentation.
And also, I hope you noticed the fall leaves as well, which are also not that bad.
We did, yes. In Florida, the only thing that changes is the color of the license plate. So thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. We will have our next presentation, mechanical dewatering and nutrient stripping. But before we do that, Virginia, from a county's perspective, obviously we saw the graphic of the remaining Muck and Laura Lee's suggestion. I actually was thinking about the capping. You know, maybe instead of having a diver go down with a vacuum, we do a capping over the remaining Muck to have the top level be inviting for those organisms. But I'd imagine the ROI, your return on investment, goes down as you go from something that is, you know, a quick larger to something that's tinier, smaller.
Right, so one factor is certainly cost, but the other is that these deep pits in the lagoon function like dumpsters. And right now, the dumpsters are full and they're overflowing. And every time the wind blows and the waves kick up, that light organic material is being fluffed up out of the dumpster and spreading and smothering the seagrass and adjacent and fauna. And so a lot of what we're doing right now is taking the trash out and emptying the dumpster so that it can function to collect
More.
muck again instead and protect the surrounding area. And so that's part of why these transects were really important, because we didn't expect a lot of in-fauna recovery down in the bottom where it will probably still be mucky, but we hope to see improvements on the perimeter. And so that's what we've been working to try to document whether that happens or not.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any other questions?
Please. Sorry, you also asked about capping. So we are also look at these projects. So if, if it's the only sump, if it's the only dumpster around, right, then we need to maintain it as a dumpster. If there are multiple dumpsters, then maybe we can empty this dumpster, but cap this other, fill and cap this other one and bring the bottom up to grade where it could be productive seagrass bed or oyster bed. And so that is part of the assessment that we do. We also look at the cost of dredging versus capping. So there's a lot that goes into deciding what activity takes place at which sites.
I know Stephanie's got a question, but just real quick, is there a particular project or dredging that we are doing that? Just for my information.
The Cocoa Beach Golf Project is currently planning capping, and we have an assessment underway for Canaveral South, whether that would be dredging or capping.
Okay, awesome, cool. Sorry, Stephanie, go ahead, please.
And again, I know there's a trade-off in cost, but getting back to Laura Lee's perspective, is it possible to maybe go back on the shoreline and get rid of the rest of the muck on the slopes with a diver or some kind of equipment that has that capability?
It's possible,
but
right?
It's probably not cost effective. Is that what you're saying?
It would be very, very expensive. Unless we have, giant volunteer forces.
Laura Lee volunteering out there in her scuba gear and a vacuum,
Yeah.
a Dyson and some scuba gear. Okay. All right, any other questions on that? Great conversation in Virginia. That's really interesting, so thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you, everybody. We'll go to mechanical. Do we want to take a break? And then, I'm sorry, do we want to take a break first and then we'll go into that? All right, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back. Thank you. Okay, our next presentation will be mechanical dewatering and nutrient stripping from Jake Little, President, Gator Aquatics Technologies. Morning, Jake.
Good morning, everybody. So, I am the president of Gator Aquatic Technologies. I work for basically Gator Dredging. We do the treatment operations for them for all of their polymer and nutrient stripping technologies, and also for any heavy metal removals or any other things that needs to be done. So the project that we're talking about, I mean, just quickly, the top picture up there, that is our equipment that we build. We build automated trailers that measure the flow and density and then all the other parameters that are required for the treatment of whatever material needs to be treated. So that is one of our sites on the other coast, Lake Seminole, where we were treating 7,000 gallons a minute with dual trailers in order to remove the muck that was pulled out of a giant lake, just under 1 million cubic yards, and remove the phosphorus out as well. Then the lower photos, you'll see the inflow. That's the inflow at Grand Canal. That is what's coming in. It is a lot of organics mixed with clays and sand, but a lot of organics, like they said, the black mayonnaise. The outflow, the other picture there, that is the water after it's been fully treated. We've removed all the muck out of it, and then removed 99% of all the nutrients out of it as well. Okay, just click this to go on, yeah. All right, so the interstitial water treatment, basically, as Dr. Johnson, I believe, was stating about the nitrogen and phosphorus being stuck in the muck and coming out and causing all the issues. That's exactly what is happening here, but we are actually forcing it out by when we go to dewater it. So they pump the muck into an area. We then pull it out of there and let the sand settle out of it. We pull it out of there. We treat it with chemicals in order to remove the phosphorus and the solids out of it. We bind it all together so that it stays inside the geotechnical bags that are on site. The geotechnical bags retain the majority of the muck, pretty much all of the muck, and the phosphorus and some of the nitrogen that is then locked up and bound with the solids so that it doesn't continue out of the water. This we have to, we are not required by permit to do the treatment on it, but it is a requirement for us to do it, pay for performance, and also a requirement to keep the job running is to make sure that we remove the nitrogen down to less than 3 parts per million or 3,000 parts per billion, and remove the phosphorus down to less than 75 parts per billion. Like it says, it's all pay for performance, so if we make the numbers, we get paid for it. If we don't make the numbers, we don't get paid for it. It is extremely hard to do this, extremely hard, because treating the brackish water, not only is it fresh water, it's not fresh water, this is, environmental brackish water, so there's a lot of different things that are in that water, and also with it being canals and stuff behind people's homes, there's a lot of debris and a lot of other stuff that just is in there that we don't know what it is. So we have to take it all and deal with it all, and we do that. So we have to deal with the variable decomposition rates, which you see up there as well. That is a big issue with our treatment, but we've overcome it by automating our system so that we monitor the incoming material so that we treat it with just the amount of chemicals that is required in order to remove the nutrients out of the water and then be able to put the water back without any extra chemicals or anything else in the water. Like you said, the difference in sediment characteristics when the dredge moves. I mean, you go from, the muck material, which is organic base, to a heavy clay base if they hit the bottom of something, or to a sandy base, or to even different types of muck. We go from the black muck to a greenish muck to a brownish muck. There's different types of material that comes through that we have to be prepared to change on the fly. And we do that with our personnel on site and also with the ability of our system to monitor what's coming in. The rainfall does take into consideration as well, because that changes the chemistry of our water, because then our water on site is no longer doesn't have as high of salinity in it. So we have to adjust our dosages based upon the rainfall levels that are seen on the site as well. That's pretty much just it. The sediment characteristics. So the DMMA size and configuration, all of that was designed in order to be able to achieve the goal that was in mind. In order to get the total nitrogen and total phosphorus down to the levels that are required, we had to build basically a water treatment plant, a mobile water treatment plant that can treat all the varying solids and everything that comes into there. So what we did is we staged the sizes of the retention ponds and other things for the water treatment in order to ensure that we had enough time for the reaction of the chemicals, but not too much time to cause, other things to accumulate in the water. Any sort of byproducts or other things like that that can form based on treatment of the water, we don't let the water stay in areas for long enough for that to happen, and we'll get into that in a second. So these, like this, basically the same thing it says, what I've already said, that the systems, they automatically make real-time adjustments. We are measuring all different parameters of the water, basically several times a second. The system is monitoring it and making adjustments to the dosage rates of the different things that are there. The pay for performance, they give us a grace period in order for startup of the job, and we need that every year because there is changes that happen every year based on the startup and stuff like that. So we have a little bit of a grace period in order to ensure that we can get to the numbers we need to get to. The bottom jars there, that's a jar test, which is showing the material. What we do is we take the material fresh out of the pipe and we dilute it with some background water so that we get a really fine, low amount of muck in that water. And then we take some of the water directly out of the discharge treatment and we put the same sediment in it and mix it up in order to ensure that there's no residual chemical in there. If there was residual chemical in there, those one jar would be clear and the other jar would still be that hazy green color like that. So that shows that the treatment method is actually treating exactly how it needs to treat and there's no overdosing of any of the chemicals there. So each one of these projects that we do, they have to be completely tailored to meet the muck dredge that's there. So when we've done Grand Canal and Sykes Creek, we go out, we sample everything, we take and we monitor everything that's in there. We take measurements on it, calculations, and figure out exactly what needs to be, how it needs to be treated, how we need to handle it, the various chemical things that need to be used for it, because the different material in different areas have different charges to them. If you think of it like magnets almost, the material itself will have a positive charge or a negative charge in the material. We have to use chemicals that will then create a long chain of the opposite charge in the water. So it'd be like a piece of spaghetti that you strung out with all different charge sites on it, and the solids that are there will stick to the different charge sites, and that's what binds it up and holds it together. So we have to do that for each one of the things while we're also keeping in mind the ability to treat to remove the phosphorus and also to remove the nitrogen out of the water. So there's a lot of intermingling and stuff in order to make this work just right. I mean, it's like just right in order to get this to work properly. That's it. All right. Well, that's it for that. I can give you guys just a demonstration. This is muck directly out of Grand Canal's sampling port, directly out of the incoming. So if we let that sit, it'll sort of settle, but it won't really do a whole lot. This is a jar of the exact same thing, the muck straight out of it. This is one of the chemicals that we use. It is water.
So we can be seen on.
He will.
Yeah. So we use all the same chemicals that are used in the water treatment plants to treat drinking water and also wastewater. The chemical that this is a polymer. So basically it's exactly what I was saying. It has a long chain on it that has a charge.
Let's hope there's no volcano that erupts with the baking soda.
Yeah. So with the water treated, it's hard to see from back there, but you'll see it in just a second. The material all is bound up and the clear water is coming out on the top of it. And that was quick and dirty. I didn't have the exact measurements for exactly how much it would take, so it might have a little haze to it. But yeah, you can see it moving and compacting, and this one's still staying the same way it is. So This process would remove just the organically bound phosphorus and nitrogen. This does not remove any of the soluble phosphorus or nitrogen that's in the water. So the stuff that's actually broken down and degraded down in the muck that gets released during the dredging operation, that we remove with other chemicals and bind them to those solids so that they don't go back out into the Indian River Lagoon.
And Jake, that treatment is on the inflow before it goes into the bags,
Yes.
is that correct?
Yes, so it goes directly from the inflow, we remove the sand out there, then we pump that material, it runs through a lot of pipes that then, we have actually calculated the size and the distance and the speed of the flow rate, because we're monitoring all of that, so that we inject the exact amount of chemical that it takes to treat that mud in the pipeline when it goes by that one section.
Yes, sir.
So at all times, we are monitoring exactly how much flow rate there is and exactly how much solids there are in there. So we can put a probe in there and I can tell you there's, 12.75% solids in that material. And so then the system will automatically adjust and say, if it's 12.75%, I need to put in 2 pounds per ton of this polymer in order to make it do that and settle out exactly the way it is. So as the variation happens, because the sand separation basin, the water goes up and down, it'll go down towards the bottom, it'll suck more of the muck, we need more of the polymer in there, and it'll add more of the polymer at that time. Then when it goes back to lighter solids, it'll reduce the polymer and it'll just put in just the amount that's needed so that the bags dewater and the muck all stays there, but then there's no residual polymer. And that's what that other jar test was showing you on there, that there's no extra polymer going out into the lagoon after the treatment process.
Laura Lee.
So, I drive by and I look and I see those big tube things, and I wonder, what do they do? So is the muck, the solids collecting in those bags?
You got it.
All right, what happens to it? Do you pick up the bags and take them to the dump, or what happens, once the muck is in the bags?
Okay, so the bags, if you think of like a burlap sack, it's like a big plastic burlap sack. So it has a bunch of holes in it that the material can stay out of. We make a structure that's strong enough so that the material stays, but the water can come out through the holes. So those bags are going to be filled with that muck material that's settling in that jar. And that material there, when the bag is completely full and we can't get any more into it, can't squeeze any more in, they'll let it set for about 3 or 4 days, which is unheard of using geotextile bags. Usually it's weeks to months. But because we've got it so dialed down to where we're treating exactly what needs to go in there, the exact amount, they can be dug out a lot quicker. So about 4 or 5 days, they go in, they'll cut a hole in the bag, and then they'll dig it out with an excavator and load it into dump trucks. And they'll haul that to a farm to be spread on a field on a farm. So that's all get dug out, and then the bags get thrown away at the end.
Oh, okay, so you're throwing the bags away, so you can punch as many holes as you need to in the bag to excavate
Yes.
the contents, and
Yes.
then the bag gets thrown away and you put a new bag there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that answers that.
Terry.
Yeah, so that dried muck that you haul out, then the nitrogen and phosphorus is bound in there. So if you spread it on arable land, it's not going to leach back into the water.
Correct. It is bound in there so that it can't leach back into the water, but it is still bioavailable for plants.
Cool. How does that work?
Kimberly? Yeah.
Does that leave the polymers in the fields, or what happens to those other
The polymers break
components?
down. The polymers break down over time, so those no longer bind it. But the other chemicals that are there, aluminum-based products, they bind up the phosphorus. That's what pulls the phosphorus out of the water and pulls the arsenic and other things out of the water.
Mhm.
That stuff there binds it up, and that's what holds it there.
But when it's post-field, once it's been spread, the polymers just biodegrade over
Yes.
time?
The polymers break down, yes.
Okay, and the testing method that you showed, you do that, how
Daily.
often? Is it exactly like you showed us for the post-treatment water? To make sure that the polymer content is minimized
Yes.
in what goes back in?
Yes.
And are there any other specs for that? Is there parts per million that are mandated that you can't release back into the lagoon? Or is there any biohazard from the polymers either way?
There's no biohazard from the polymers either way. It would take a large amount of additional polymer to have any sort of biohazard.
Mhm.
But the There's not really a parts per million spec, but there is the jar test itself does show that if there was even 1 part per million of additional things in there, it would settle and you wouldn't see it. So we're not really, there's not really a spec for that. But
Okay. And where that cleaned water is going back into the lagoon, are there any visible benefits to the habitat, the environment there, the ecosystem? Is anyone looking or monitoring anything that might be a benefit for where that first clean water is coming in? And is there a dissolved oxygen content measured?
we've measured dissolved oxygen content a couple of times, and we've had no issues with dissolved oxygen. But we do not monitor the discharge for anything. I don't know if the county has anything there.
I would just think it would be a benefit to that acute area to have that fresh water, fresh salinity, obviously involved. And you mentioned that you do check the salinity as well on what goes back in.
We don't check salinity on what goes back in because we have to adjust our process based on rainfall when rainfall happens, but we don't monitor salinity directly.
I'm just going to add to this. So Dr. Fox has been doing his bottom water dissolved oxygen monitoring in the Sykes Creek phase area, and that includes the discharge canal where this was being completed, and his data showed that after dredging, even with that discharge, there's actually an increase in bottom water dissolved oxygen. So it's not something that, we are there making them look at, but Austin has been looking at that.
That's fabulous. Thank you for that. And then one other question. I know in a previous conversation we had here before, similar to this, they said that all of the monitoring to make sure you're meeting specs is in-house. Is that still in-house, or is there a third party that?
Oh, no, third party.
It is third party? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yes, definitely.
Stephanie, and then Laura Lee.
I was just wondering, are you seeing a lot of heavy metals in the sediment?
We do not monitor it for heavy metals.
Okay.
Okay, Laura Lee?
So then that means that whatever heavy metals are getting picked up are going out to the farm fields and going out and being spread out over farmlands? And what keeps those from going into the groundwater, soaking down in?
So we did extensive sampling of the muck materials in situ, in the canals, before we dredged them to ensure that there were not heavy metal issues, right? Arsenic was the exception. There were some hot spots of arsenic, and so that's why we're measuring arsenic on a regular basis, and sediments that are excavated that are too high in arsenic, we either mix them with cleaner material to get it down to where it's safe levels, and then it can still go to agriculture, or if mixing is not feasible, then it gets disposed of at a landfill.
Stephanie, or Kimberly, sorry.
Is that post-product, is that something that you can sell? Or is that something that you pay to put onto those lands? How does that mitigate, what gives you that opportunity to put them on those chosen lands?
I am not on that part of the project, so I do not know the answer to that.
Let me just, jump in for a second.
If I understand correctly.
So this is Gator Aquatic Technologies. This is a different company than Gator Dredging.
Okay.
Right? So Gator Aquatic is a subcontractor to Gator Dredging. So they're doing the interstitial water treatment part of the project, and that's what he's presenting to you today.
Oh, thank you for that clarification. Excellent.
Okay. Any other questions for Jake? All right, Jake, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Good job.
Oh, Terry. Yes, sir.
I think you're best to answer. So the manatee moratorium is throughout the lagoon or just in certain areas?
It varies depending on where you are in the lagoon.
Okay, so it is regional. And so the Sykes Creek thing is not currently active because of the issue with the muck mediation area?
So we broke that project into two phases because we needed a dredge material management area. for the volume of muck that's to be removed. And we knew that was going to take some time to buy a site, permit a site, develop a dredge material management area. In the meantime, we were able to contract Phase 1 to place the spoil on an existing spoil island. And so Phase 1 is completed. They filled the template on the spoil island. They're now restoring the spoil island. We're still in the development phase on the DMMA, which will be used for Phase 2.
So there's no dredging right now? It's
Right,
Yeah.
we're between dredging in Phase 1 and dredging in Phase 2. We're in the constructing the
Thank you.
the Phase 2 DMMA.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and go to our next presentation, which is the Pineda Dredge Material Management Area Temporary Use Agreement Update from Abbey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As we discussed at the last meeting, we had brought up the fact that we had sent out a letter to the residents within the Grand Canal dredging facility and let them know that we were going to hold a public meeting on April 25th to answer any questions and address concerns and talk about the fact that we were asking for a temporary use agreement extension for that Pineda dredge material management area. From this meeting, it developed a lot of helpful conversations among the attendees, and they requested a short list of county action items. From this list of action items, we created an email chain with the community attendees and provided updates as we go along on all of these action items to keep everyone up to date and informed. This included hydrogen sulfide air quality monitoring, which we began on May 1st. So this was something that was requested at that meeting, and we got right to it with a third-party consultant and began that monitoring on May 1st. In addition to this, the Brevard County Fire Rescue Hazmat Team volunteered to go out to the site, and on May 3rd, they walked the entire Grand Canal dredge material management area and then the entire site, and they tested the air for any flammable gases that encompass volatile organic compounds or hydrocarbons, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane. They also returned to the DMMA again on May 6th and repeated the same air quality tests, and they performed the same tests along Lanternback Drive on Tortoise Island. The hazmat team detected no air quality concerns at the DMMA or along Lanternback Drive. The temporary use agreement extension was approved by the County Commission on May 7th, and that new expiration date is July 7th, 2028, to use that dredge material management area. This came with a direction to continue hydrogen sulfide air quality monitoring throughout the month of May on the site. And so today I'm going to go over the results that we have from May 1st all the way up to yesterday afternoon, evening on the following slides. So OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's permissible exposure limit for construction workers is an average of 10 parts per million over an 8-hour time period. The most stringent U.S. EPA acute exposure guideline level for hydrogen sulfide in a residential setting is an average of 0.33 parts per million over an 8-hour time period. So I'm going to explain this map, and I'm going to come back to it a couple times to kind of help explain the process of this. And so the first one we're going to focus on in this map is that little circled flag. It's left. It's kind of hard to see on the screen. It is left of, okay, right here. We're going to focus on this monitoring station. And so on the first day of monitoring, the sensor was located adjacent to where the muck slurry enters the site. So that's that pit right there. That is where the muck is directly being pumped into the site. This sensor was placed directly downwind. It was blowing east, and it was directly downwind of where that muck was coming in the site, and it remained there for 24 hours. And so, yeah, this is where that inflow pipe is. And that's exactly where that muck is being pumped into. And it was blowing east that day, and so we were catching that downwind, any concentrations from that. And so the first graph that I'm going to look and talk to you about is regarding the data from that sensor in that spot. It's a lot to take in, so I'm just going to walk you through it. At the top, you have OSHA's permissible exposure limit, which is that 8-hour average exposure construction limit at 10 parts per million, the red dotted line. The green box indicate dredging activities. This includes active dredging and then also managing the muck, so pumping it into the tube, digging it out, full operation. As you can see, The raw data is in that light gray, and then that 8-hour calculated exposure is what we're really focused on, and that is well below the construction worker limit for OSHA. So that's that first sensor. Coming back to the map, and so after that day one, the sensor was relocated daily within the construction area to a location directly downwind of odor-producing activities. So our third-party consultants were going out each day. They were keeping in touch with the dredgers and looking at what dredging activities were going on and placing the sensors directly downwind of whatever dredging activity was happening. And so all of those different red flags are showing where it was being moved downwind to whatever, if they were digging out the bags, if they were pumping it in, that was reflected in this monitoring. So we have a broader range now. We have looking at about two weeks of data here. And again, the green boxes indicate full dredging activity, which include dredging and muck loading for transportation and disposal. The orange, there was one instance on a Saturday where they were not actively dredging, but they were digging the material out of the geotextile tubes for transportation and disposal. And then on Sundays, they are not operating on the site. So that's kind of the color breakdown of this. Again, at the top, you're seeing that 10 parts per million OSHA permissible 8-hour average exposure construction limit. Below now, you're going to see that EPA exposure residential guideline at 0.33 in the blue dotted line. And again, looking at that orange, yellow, solid line at the bottom, that is our 8-hour calculated exposure. And so taking this broad look at it, you can see that we are well below OSHA's guideline and also below the residential guideline. So now we're going to kind of take a more zoomed in look at the same set of data from these downwind sensors. You can see that even on days where there was a peak, we are still, a third of what that residential guideline is for hydrogen sulfide in the air. Let you look at that. So then coming back to this map, the last graph that we're going to look at is this yellow box right here. That was the second sensor, which was placed on the construction area closest to the Tortoise Island homes. So this station is remaining there. It's staying in this one spot. We are well below OSHA's 10 parts per million. So again, taking that more zoomed in approach and looking at the residential guideline at 0.33, the blue dotted line, full operation. And even on the days where we did have a peak in the concentrations, it was still about half of what that residential guideline is for that 8-hour calculated exposure. Do you have any questions?
Okay, thank you for your presentation. We'll do Stephanie, and then Terry, then Charles. Kimberly, I am so sorry, Kimberly.
That's okay. Can you clarify the dots versus the solid lime green line? Is that a mean average, or what are those other components being tested for?
It's the raw data. So the sensors that they had out there could detect all the way down to parts per billion, and it's taking up a measure it's taking a measure from the air every minute. Okay. So that's what that raw data points are in the gray. And what all of these guidelines are against is that 8-hour time weighted average. And so, that exposure for the construction workers that are there for 8 hours a day, you calculate that average, and that's what the limit in the guidelines
And
are
that's the
based
solid
on.
line?
That is the solid
So
yellow
the dots, it did exceed, were there any explanations, and were there any other
Yes.
chemicals tested in this, or was it just for the hydrogen sulfide, and why the hydrogen sulfide?
The hydrogen sulfide came from requests from residents that live in the vicinity because of that rotten egg smell. So hydrogen sulfide is something that muck naturally produces because it's an anoxic environment. And so it produces that odor that, obviously smells like rotten eggs. And so, for example, like on Tuesday, May 14th and May 15th, that was this week, and we had those storms blow through. Looking at that fixed station, they were digging out of bag 9, which I will point out is this bag right here. And so halfway through the day, the wind shifted because of the storms, and it blew it directly northwest. And so that's where that sensor was picking up that hydrogen sulfide. And again, the same thing on Wednesday, May 15th. They were digging out of bag 1, which is right here. And the wind shifted around noon a little bit northeast. And so that's what it was capturing.
So is the greater content when they're emptying the bags, obviously because the concentration is thicker and more capable of like creating aerosols, or as opposed to when it's going in, it's still in a containment unit?
It really just kind of varies. You would smell it in the lagoon. You would smell it when they're pumping it onto the site and when they're digging out bags. I think the wind direction picked it up. I don't know.
But yes, I mean, it's when it's being aerosolized. And so anytime, it's in a froth coming out of the pipe, or they're actively digging it out of the bag, right, there's going to be more opportunities for it to be aerosolized.
That's minimal. Most of the operations day-to-day is intake, not the excavation. Or is it?
I mean, this is showing all the green boxes, it's full dredging and also handling that material.
Okay.
And so they're pretty productive.
Thank you.
But you can see, like, looking at even the raw data points, if it's taking it every minute, it doesn't last long. It doesn't stay out in the air like that. It comes right back down, so.
All right, Laura Lee?
I don't know if a comparison has ever been made, but there are collection points, like mainly where causeways adjoin shorelines, where massive amounts of seagrass pile up and rot and stink for days and weeks at a time. How does the aerosol and smell at one of those collection points compare with what's going on at this dredging site? Has anybody studied that?
Not to my knowledge.
Do we have it for the month, or we returned it after the week?
I think we don't have it for the month now, since we
Yeah.
extended
If you know of any areas like that we could test now while we have the sensors, that's a really interesting question. We could try to make that happen.
One of the worst parts is just south of Kelly Park along Banana River Drive. That's the one that really comes to mind, and it smells there for weeks and months. But I don't know. We probably have enough drift algae and stuff that's been blown in there, but like, towards the middle of the summer, it's nasty there.
Thank you, Laura Lee. Charles?
Yeah, I was curious, is it continuous monitoring or is it grab samples?
So every minute it takes a sample from the air.
so it'll be
it's been
continuous.
continuous over,
Right.
they come in every day, the third-party company, they've been changing out the batteries and making sure it's been full operational.
And I think that H2S is one of those chemicals that has good warning properties. That is, you can smell it before you're overexposed.
Yeah, you can smell it all the way down to
Right.
0.0047
Right,
parts
so
per
that-
million. So, when
So
I'm
just because you can smell
paddleboarding-
it doesn't mean you're overexposed.
Yes, but it's nice to have the data.
Oh, yeah,
To give us that
absolutely.
validation, yeah.
And some of us, Charles, have a more acute sense of smell anyway.
You're very sensitive, we know that.
It goes with the being able to cook. So anyways, Terry?
You showed us where the slurry comes into the site. Where does the processed effluent return?
So it comes in right here at the sand separation basin, that's where it's pumped in, and then they have pipes underground that get the muck into the geotextile tubes, and then the water treatment, they reroute it to they have their trailer set up over here that you just saw from Gator Aquatics, and then that discharges right around, you can't see it in the map because the trees hide it.
Okay, so it doesn't follow the slurry line all the way back. It's just, actually, I'm on this question earlier about what happens in the local area where we're returning that treated water? Is it just coming to off the site and out into the canal?
Yeah, they have, the trees are blocking it, but yeah, there's an outflow pipe that it's lined, and then they have a turbidity curtain too as well, and the water goes back out into the Grand
Okay, but
Canal.
it sort of ends right there off the side of that treatment site?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
Laura Lee?
Is this DMMA site going to be used for other dredging projects besides just the Grand Canal?
So the board approval on the 7th was strictly for the county's unincorporated Dredge Canal project, and the
the temporary use authorization expires when that project is complete. It automatically expires when that project is complete if that occurs before the temporary use authorization expires. So whichever comes first.
Sure.
So whenever, if Patrick, if the military decides to do something about the area, next to Patrick Air Force Base, will they have a DMMA on Patrick, or are they going to inflict it on our county sites?
I'm not aware of the Space Force having any plans, but they would not be able to use county land without getting permission to use county land.
Okay, all right. Well, I attended that meeting, and I want to give you and your staff kudos for actually going out into the community and doing that outreach and taking questions and answering them. So thank you guys for doing that and responding with the tests. So thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Windsor. He's been sitting here so quiet. He's taking notes. It's so rare for the teacher to take notes. Dr. Windsor, please.
Yeah, Abbey, I know that atmospheric work is not your primary goal in life. Do you know what method they were using to measure the sulfur?
They had, they have like monitoring stations out there. So it is a battery operated station, and there was a bunch of gizmos inside that I could not explain.
Okay, well,
but it has a port, and every minute it's taking a sample from the air, and it records that in real time. So I can actually view it on my phone, the concentration.
And it's not so much the mechanism they're using for sampling, so much as the technique, because some of them combine sulfides together, and some of them measure hydrogen sulfides separately from other sulfides. And I would just be curious if, which one they're using.
I can reach out to
Yeah, and
the engineers.
it's not a critical thing. And you mentioned the .0047 ppm. I've actually run a whole lot of tests when I was back teaching the atmospheric pollution laboratory back at FIT with students doing blind testing of smells and odors and tastes of various sorts. And the subjectivity of the response, and it's well known in the literature about how subjective people's noses are to a variety of smells. Yeah. And H2S is one of those ones where there are orders of magnitude differences in sensitivity of people smelling things. And so I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware that, although some people say, I didn't smell anything, other people could smell something. And the other thing I want to remind everybody of, that we're all generators of hydrogen sulfide, every single one of us. And every day you encounter hydrogen sulfide someplace in your life. I'm almost positive of it. And you probably notice the smell and then go on. I'll rest there for today. Thank you.
And I'll just add, right, that both the hydrogen and the sulfur part of hydrogen sulfide, right, they are one of the two of the 6 building blocks of life, right? We are made up out of hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And so, it's no surprise that when you have rotting organics, you're going to be releasing all of those 6 items and smelling hydrogen sulfide.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on. Abbey, thank you.
Great job.
Yes.
The next one is the Gallie Muck dredging bid results, again from Abbey. Bobby. Oh,
I
you
gotta
gotta
go.
Okay.
Yeah. But I will say that, I do the wine guild, because I make my own wine, and we do also, one of the meetings a year, we do blind smell tests, and it's amazing what you think is one thing and turns out is another. And in wine, that's, things seem like other things. That's part of the point of wine. And we'll be there Thursday night.
When I worked in the lab with Austin, we did, sniff validation, who was closest to the concentration in the samples, and it was extremely variable.
Yeah.
All right, Bobby,
All right,
thank you so much.
enjoy.
Go take
I
care
have
of
kids
those
to
those
test.
students. Yeah, thank you.
Hello again. Now we're going to go over Gallie's bid results. So our budget going into this project was approximately $20 million, and the proposed bid cost came in at over $48 million. We had a lengthy advertisement from March 5th to May 7th, so there were plenty of time to get bids in. We had 58 vendors download the bid documents, 11 requested additional information, and 9 attended the non-mandatory pre-bid meeting. So we were going into this really hopeful and expecting a competitive bid process. However, in the end, we got one bid. So, yes, correct. Looking at some cost comparisons to our other projects, so for dredging costs, it's about $30 per cubic yard for Gallie, about $44 per cubic yard for Sykes Creek, Phase 1, and about $19 per cubic yard for Grand Canal. Comparing the proposed interstitial water treatment costs, it came to about $22 per cubic yard for nutrient removal for Gallie, about $8 per cubic yard for nutrient removal for Sykes Creek, and about $7 per cubic yard for nutrient removal for Grand Canal.
Sorry, let me just interrupt for a second. So the reason that this says about with these dollar amounts is that the way the bids are structured, it's by pay sections. And so there are different values for dredging here, dredging here, dredging here, this side canal, that side canal. And so for the purpose of this presentation, we averaged those to make an easy comparison. But it's actually much more specific than that in the bid tab.
And so our next step is to meet with the bidder to discuss increased costs, ask the interested vendors why they did not submit a bid, and then reevaluate that bid process based on meetings and responses that we receive. And then moving forward, we want to incorporate the lessons learned into the Sykes Creek Phase 2 bid packages, and the county commission will consider rejecting the sole bid.
All right. Anyone have any questions on that? Terry, then Kimberly.
MMA be for that site?
For Gallie, it's permitted to go to the BV52 site, Inland Navigational District site in Palm Bay.
Okay.
Kimberly, see, I got your name right that time. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you, sir. I love the next steps. That's huge. So great to see that. I would imagine part of that is just a metric you use with any situation where you only get one bid. But very interested to see why, if it was the scope of the project or resources, why there was only one. 2 questions. With County Commission, why, if they consider rejecting the bid, what would be the next process? If they decided to say no, would they reevaluate with Gator, or obviously before that opportunity comes before them, there could be additional bids added?
No, I mean, it was a sealed bid process.
Okay.
So this is the sole bid, and the county commission can either magically find $28 million that's not in the approved swirl budget, or they can negotiate with the sole bidder to try to come down to some agreeable price, or they can reject the bid and we can start over. I think,
So there would be the option to reject and then start over, and that would be when that reevaluation of the bid process was implemented?
Exactly.
Okay, and any of the state and/or federal funding opportunities that are promised for water treatment, are those options for that remaining balance of 28 million? Is that looked into? I know sometimes we talk about the absence of grant procurement in the county staff not being as, much as we'd all like.
Right, so we already have some grant funding for this project, and we would certainly hope to be able to get some more, but the delta that we're looking at here is just extremely large.
Stephanie, yes, and then Laura Lee.
To me, the interesting thing was the difference in the interstitial water treatment. And why is that so different between those projects.
Do you want to go back to that slide? So when Grand Canal and Sykes Creek went out to bid, they hadn't done this, right? And Grand Canal was initially bid with another subcontractor in mind. You'll recall that the Grand Canal project is on its third subcontractor to be able to achieve the targets. And so I think that Gator Dredging and has learned a lot about what it takes to actually be able to deliver, right? Everything Jake just described in terms of, you know, the fine tuning, the constant measuring of the flow to constantly dial the treatment, that takes resources. So those are questions that we will ask to try to understand, you know, is $22 really what it costs, or are there ways that we have written it or requirements that we have made that are driving that cost up unnecessarily? Is there still a way to get what we want in terms of clean water for the lagoon at a lower cost? But I think you know, and that's why this bid has been so important to us, because you know, those first two projects were really bid before the dredging industry had experience doing what we were asking them to do. They were guessing what it was going to cost them, and now they know, and this is the cost they've given us.
And then a second question, because you said you've averaged all this. So is it possible to maybe go forward with one part of the project that's coming in at a lower rate than maybe the canals or whatever is coming in higher, if it ends up that this is indeed what it costs?
So one thing I need to stop and say is that the current project or the bid process is still in a cone of silence. So while, until the county commission either accepts or negotiates or rejects that bid, we are limited in what we can say, because we don't want to bias the process.
Okay. And I think Virginia,
I'm sorry, having said that, is there an issue with putting these costs up?
No, the costs have been posted, right? The envelope was unsealed and the bid was posted. We've been through the protest period, so really what we've presented to you is all public record, but we just can't talk about the details in a way that might bias anything.
Are these dredging contracts fixed price or cost plus?
They are a cost per cubic yard for each pay section, a lump sum for demobilization, so it really depends on the.
So they're unit rate based.
There are unit rates.
So that's fixed, so that, where I'm really going with this is whether their contracts are auditable or not.
Let me add, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a variety of different ways. So fixed price is is also, in many cases, also lump sum. It would be, I'm going to pay you $1 million for this, and that's it. Cost plus is usually a little different, which is, cost plus is that I'm going to pay you profit, and then I'm going to reimburse you for whatever costs you incur. This, I think, is somewhere in between, which is generally that there are going to be elements that you're going to be paid specifically a certain amount of money for a certain thing. So you know they have to mobilize one time, you're going to pay them a fixed amount for that mobilization. Other things are then generally paid on a unit rate basis. So I'm going to pay you X dollars per ton, I'm going to pay you X dollars per pound of nutrient removal, and so it's a combination of those fixed elements that you can clearly define that says, I'm going to go do this one time, and then a cost that is a unit rate-based contract for measurable quantities for other things you're going to do. So I'm assuming that's the way it's structured?
Yes.
So.
In my world, we call that IDIQ. In indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. Anyhow, I was really getting to how do we know if the previous contractors, did they come out of that hole or did they really get skinned? Is there something that would indicate that all dredging projects going forward are going to cost twice what we thought they were going to cost?
Right. We don't have records to that would answer that question.
All right. And I think, Virginia, the next county commission, when the date is
Tuesday.
Tuesday, and then that's when the decision will be made. Okay, great. Abby, thank you so much. Laura Lee?
So I'm wondering if part of the dramatic increase in the cost is because of the length of the distance that the sludge has to travel to get to the DMMA. Didn't we have a DMMA at Sarno Road, like next to the Sarno Road landfill that's a lot closer?
So the county owned land there and allowed the Water Management District to temporarily use that land for dewatering the muck that they dredged out of the Gallie River. They then restored that site when they were done. So there's not a developed DMMA there. Also, to get the muck all the way to that site, you got to go up the Gallie River and under multiple streets, up, along ditches. You've got to have your inflow pipe going all the way up there and your outflow pipe coming all the way down, and it's miles. So you would also have to have booster pumps. They had booster pumps along the way. So it's really not much closer, and you end up with booster pumps next to residential neighborhoods instead of out in the lagoon.
So it's easier, because they're going to have to use booster pumps too, I guess,
Anyway.
to go 13 miles, so, but it's going to be easier than trying to go under streets and stuff.
Yeah, and this is not 13 miles, because this is 6. It's from just north of the Gallie Causeway.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Abby. Thank you. All right. We'll go ahead and go on to new business. So the next item is the 2025 plan update schedule.
Yes, it feels like we just did this, but it is time to talk about the next year's. So here is the proposed schedule for the 2025 plan update. On July 12th, so our next Citizen Oversight Committee meeting, in the agenda packet, we will have the cost share eligibility to include for the different project types. Then we will have that meeting on the 19th, where you will vote for that cost share eligibility for the next grant cycle. We will post those on the July 29th and open the online applications for the period of the end of July through the end of September. So that gives people about 2 months to get their applications submitted. Then staff will review all of those applications, ask the applicant questions and get clarification on anything. We will present that packet to you with all of those applications on November 8th, and then we will have the November 15th Citizen Oversight Committee meeting where you can discuss those projects, and then the ones that are approved will go into the 2025 plan update, which we usually give you that in the month of December, the draft of it to start reviewing. So there's potential to cancel the December meeting so you can focus on reviewing the new plan update. We will have the Citizen Oversight Committee meeting in January on the 17th, where you can approve, or hopefully we have all your edits in by then so we can get that done. The plan has to be posted for 15 days before it can go to the county commission for vote. And so we have the February 11th and the 8th or 18th as our potential dates. We don't have the county commission schedule meeting for next year yet, but that's the tentative schedule.
Okay. And so the two things, just want to point out again, starting in July, because we usually do not have a June meeting.
Correct.
So this will be our last meeting before that July date. Just wanted to say that. And then I love Christmas Eve reading the night before Christmas and the plan updated. I just sit there with my socks and PJs and eggnog and cookies, and it's so enjoyable. So, okay, with that said, does anybody have any questions? Is there a motion to go ahead and accept the plan schedule?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? All right, we've got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion here on the committee? No one else wants to say they do the exact same thing on Christmas Eve? All right, then we'll go ahead and take public comment. Is there any public comment on the plan schedule? All right, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor of approving the plan schedule, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it passes. Christmas Eve plan set. Nice, thank you. All right, the next item we have is the project expansion and funding increase request for the Brevard County Hog Point Oyster Bar project. Hi, Jenny.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so the county has a plan to do an oyster bar project at Hog Point in conjunction with the seagrass restoration project that we've received local and state grants for. When we submitted to the Brevard, to the Sorrel plan, we had submitted in 2022 plan update to remove 126 pounds at $397 per pound to construct a 3,150 square feet of oyster habitat at that location. When we went and did our final surveys and got our permits, we were able to actually fit in an additional 450 square feet in that kind of continuous string of oyster modules. And so to get the additional 450 square feet at the 2024 cost share, it is $475 per pound of total nitrogen reduction, and the expansion then would be $8,550 of additional cost share for that additional square footage, which could be allocated from the Brevard County Central Indian River Lagoon oyster bars that has, for the fiscal year 24, $177,238 budgeted that has not been allocated to projects.
All right.
So what we're asking is whether or not we might get an approval for that $8,550 increase for the 450 additional square feet of oysters.
And again, this is for the oysters as the Sorrel money. The other project is coming out of the county.
All the other funding for seagrass-related activities is coming from grants, and this is specifically to construct the oyster habitat.
Oyster habitat. Okay.
And it's, the reason that it's conjunction and why I mentioned the seagrass project is that this is one of those leveraged dollars opportunity where the oysters, we're hoping in conjunction with, is going to benefit the adjacent seagrass planting area.
Yeah, great.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the approval.
Okay. Is there a
second?
Okay. There's multiple seconds. Jackie, pick your choice. All right. Any discussion on the committee? Okay. Any public discussion? Public comment? All right. With none being said, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Thank
you.
you very much, Jenny. Laura Lee will be there with the scuba gear and a vacuum to help you with that. All right. So now we'll go ahead and go to general public comments. I've got one card here, Ms. Sullivan. And before we take public comment, I just wanted to say one thing. I think that there has been a lot of attention put on to the Sorrel project. I think it's going to continue to be a lot of attention pointed. And one of the things, and Sandra, I'd like to ask you whether you'd agree on this. I'd like for us and those out there to focus on the policies that are going on and not necessarily the people. I think the staff that work are doing their job. They're putting food on their table. They are paying their bills. And I don't feel that they deserve the heat. If there's a problem with the policies, I think there are plenty of people up here that people out there can go after or comment on. But I think the staff, I really think they should not be the focus. And I think it's also, if we want to have good staff members and we want to keep good staff members, I think it's important to make sure that their job is already hard. We don't need to add to it. So I would like to ask you whether you would agree on whether or not you'll
No, I
keep the
don't agree.
focus on the policies.
Thank you. I'm going to
Okay.
talk about, I
I'll
have
start in
my
3 minutes.
right to free speech. So I want to first bring to this sorrel tax is voted by we the people, the taxpayers of Brevard, tax ourselves because we care about the lagoon, including myself, as I consider myself a very strong environmental advocate, as you saw on the mid-reach issue, which there was, I would say, some malfeasance exposed. So, so we have right now going on a number of projects that are essentially where this tax is being weaponized against we, the people of Brevard County on 3 projects. 1, the Flamingo Drive project. 2, the Grand Canal project. 3, the Rockledge Drive project. So under your documents that you have, if you go to project number 203, South Central Zone A, that is a septic to sewer project. That was originally going to be $6 million. It's now almost $12 million. According to the Lagoon plan, you can see the map here highlights that, and it says in progress. So I don't know if you've seen the pictures on social media, but I wanted to make sure that you are aware of this drive, which the people really love. And many people bike there because the trees are traffic calming. It's a very slow pace. This is what was done this week to these massive trees that the arborists say are as old as 300 years old, but they haven't done the really old ones yet, so there's 5 or 6. They came in, they butchered the trees saying they were going to be trimmed, okay? These trees are going to be trimmed, when in effect, they were taken down to trunks. This is the quality of life of the people who live on Rockledge Drive. Now, I was at a meeting at the HOA, North Merritt Island HOA, where District 2 Commissioner stated that the people on Rockledge Drive are selfish because they don't care enough about the lagoon. They care more about their trees, and they don't want to put in sewer. We have resiliency issues. This road was identified by NOAA as having resiliency issues. On the south end where there are no trees, it washed out. The road washed out during Hurricane Irma. In some cases, the road is like 12 feet away from the road. We have a hurricane, we have erosion. These trees' roots hold the banks. It's a safety issue for ability for egress to get out. That is our only way out. Sometimes you have to look at something, you have to balance things out and have where you put in advanced septic. Do you know that 5 systems have been funded by the grant, by the Sorrel tax?
Thank you. So, Virginia, were any Sorrel dollars spent on those trees?
No, sir.
Okay. So, thank you. All right, we have another public comment. Brett Wallaberg, did I get that right, sir? I'm sorry, hopefully I didn't butcher it.
Yeah, I'm kind of like the black sheep. Most of you guys know me. But my dad was a fish guide, like I said, 66 years ago. And 60 years ago, the shores of our lagoon was foam piled up. I mean, just miles and miles of it. And let me read this. I wrote this for Trudy and Fantini years ago. And I tried to deal in person, but that ain't working. Ronald Reagan once said the closest thing to eternal life in this world is a government-funded project. Putting sand on our beaches, dredging Muck out of the lagoon, repairing damage to our bridges, putting concrete catch basins in our storm drains to catch people's lawn clippings are for government projects that will go on forever. These problems and more will never be solved until people understand how the lagoon has functioned for thousands of years. Most of our lagoon shores were lined with coquina formations. The coquina that was underwater was soft. I found it twice where you could break it apart with your hands and milky white calcium would come out. If you bring back the coquina formations the way they used to be, Waves will turn in them and neutralize all the acids, so when water leaves the lagoon, acids will no longer dissolve calcium sand on our beaches. Acids will no longer preserve organic material, so dredging will not be needed. Acid will no longer damage our bridges, and there will be no need for catch basins in the storm drains to catch people's lawn clippings. All right, on behalf of the bar, they could disband this little charade if they bring the chemistry back on the shore. And I can go into detail. I deal better with person on person. I'm really not a public speaker. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. All right. So that's the end of general public comment. We'll go ahead and go to final comments by chair and committee members. Does anybody have anything? Kimberly.
I have a question. Where's the advertisement period for the call for projects, like that go into the proposed plan? Like, where do we advertise that to the community or businesses?
I reach out to all the municipalities and let them know. I have a running list of citizens that have asked for information, so it's on there. We advertise it on our website and social media as well.
And one other question. I don't remember who gave the presentation. The baffle box that was just installed that looks like with the glass, is there any identification signage around that that says, look at our baffle box? And also, is there any locks, or is it open? Maybe we shouldn't say on camera.
I would think it's not open. It would be a safety hazard.
Yes,
And I will have to check on the sign for that one. We do have that in our contract for municipalities to include signage for their projects, so.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
I remember
so
that now.
I will have to check if they put that up already or if it could be happening now.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, anybody else? Dr. Windsor.
We had a fair amount of talk about arsenic being delivered to agricultural systems today. And as I get very old, I think about all the things of my youth and all the things that were very popular with me, like eating. Potato chips were fun. And when I moved to Brevard County, I realized there were some issues with contaminants and heavy metals and pollutants of various sorts. And doing some historical investigations here in Brevard County, I recognized how much arsenic had been used in Brevard County on potato crops and other crops in Brevard County. And so, probably when most of us were growing up and having potato chips, we were probably eating a fair amount of arsenic in our potato chips because they were used a lot. I just urge people to use some sense of proportion in trying to discuss things like that are very dangerous, very hazardous, things that are common everyday items in your life. There's not a piece of food you eat that doesn't have arsenic in it. Nothing, unless you buy ultra distilled water, which may even have a few atoms of arsenic in it. There's nothing that doesn't have arsenic in it. So I urge some thoughtfulness about what does very, very dangerous mean and very, very hazardous. Because we're all focused on things that get taken out of context. And I think sometimes we lose the bigger message. So I'll leave you with that for today.
All right. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right. All right, that'll be the end of the meeting. Virginia, thank you. Staff, thank you. We'll see everybody in July. Have a great June.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.